Imagine a town so strange, so sun-scorched, and so unlike anything else on the surface of this planet that the people who live there made a decision that seems almost impossible at first glance. They decided to go underground. Not in some temporary, emergency kind of way, not as a quirky experiment conducted by a handful of eccentric individuals, but as a permanent, multi-generational, deeply practical solution to one of the harshest living environments human beings have ever chosen to call home. Imagine digging your bedroom directly into the side of a hillside, carving your kitchen and your living room and your hallways out of solid rock, and then stepping out your front door each morning into a landscape so searingly hot, so blindingly bright, and so magnificently brutally empty that it stretches in every direction to the very edge of where the eye can reach. This is Coober Pedy, a small town sitting in the middle of the South Australian outback. And before we go any further into how people actually live here, if remote, extraordinary, and genuinely one-of-a-kind places like this one fascinate you the way they fascinate us, go ahead and subscribe right now. Because today we are walking through exactly what daily life looks like in the town they call the opal capital of the world, a place where homes have no windows, where summer temperatures regularly exceed 50 degrees Celsius on the surface, and where the human capacity for stubborn, creative adaptation to almost impossible conditions has produced something truly unlike anything else you will find anywhere on Earth. Turn on notifications as well, because we have many more journeys to remarkable places still coming, and you will not want to miss where we head next. Coober Pedy sits in the far north of South Australia, roughly 850 kilometers north of Adelaide by road, deep inside the vast, ancient, and largely unpopulated interior of the Australian continent. The Stuart Highway, the long arterial road that connects Adelaide to Darwin across thousands of kilometers of outback landscape, runs directly through town, making Coober Pedy a significant waypoint on one of Australia's most iconic and demanding overland routes. Around the settlement, in every direction, the land stretches out in a series of low, reddish-brown plains, broken by occasional eroded ridges, and scattered with the strange, mounded tailings left by generations of opal miners. There is almost no shade, almost no running surface water, and almost no vegetation beyond the sparse, tough scrub plants that have evolved over millions of years to survive precisely these conditions. The sky above tends to be an extraordinary, unbroken blue during the day, and at night it fills with stars in numbers that genuinely take the breath away from anyone who has spent their life in brighter, more populated corners of the world. But during the day, particularly in the peak of summer, that sky delivers a kind of heat that has to be experienced to truly be understood. A heavy, relentless, radiating warmth that soaks into the red earth and sends temperatures on the surface climbing to levels that make conventional, above-ground living not merely uncomfortable, but genuinely dangerous. The town's name itself comes from the Arabana language, the language of the Aboriginal people whose traditional country this land belongs to. The phrase, generally interpreted as the source of the name, translates roughly to a white man in a hole, a description that, when you know what the town eventually became and how the people who settled it chose to live, turns out to be one of the more perfectly prophetic place names in Australian history. The Arabana people have known this landscape intimately for tens of thousands of years, navigating its waterholes, reading its seasons, and sustaining themselves through an encyclopedic knowledge of its resources accumulated across a span of time that makes the brief history of European settlement here look barely like a footnote. Their connection to this country runs through every aspect of the landscape, and contemporary Coober Pedy sits within a broader context of Aboriginal history and culture that reaches back far further than the opal rush that put this particular location on the modern map. That opal rush began in 1915, when a 14-year-old boy named Willie Hutchison, accompanying a water prospecting expedition into this remote and unforgiving country, stumbled across opal stones glinting in the surface rock of a low ridge. The find triggered the kind of excited, disorganized human scramble that has followed significant mineral discoveries throughout history, drawing prospectors outward from established settlements and inward from ports and cities across Australia, and eventually from much further abroad. Within a relatively short period, what had been nothing more than empty outback became a functioning, if extraordinarily basic, mining camp, and over the decades that followed, that mining camp slowly accumulated the infrastructure, the permanent population, and the accumulated human ingenuity necessary to sustain a real community in one of the most inhospitable places on the Australian continent. The underground living that Coober Pedy has become so famous for did not emerge immediately or all at once from some single clever idea. It developed gradually, organically, driven by the simple, desperate need to find relief from temperatures that made conventional shelter essentially ineffective during the worst months of the outback summer. The earliest miners sometimes sheltered in their own mine shafts during the day, retreating below ground simply to escape the killing heat above, and it did not take long before those temporary refuges began to be expanded, extended, and genuinely inhabited. Rock, particularly the soft, relatively easily worked sandstone and limestone found in the hills around Coober Pedy, maintains a remarkably stable temperature underground, typically sitting somewhere between 20 and 25 degrees Celsius, regardless of what is happening on the surface. No insulation technology, no air conditioning system, no architectural trick applied to a conventional above-ground house can match the simple, elegant effectiveness of that naturally stable underground temperature, and once the early inhabitants of this place discovered that reality firsthand, the pattern of underground living was essentially set. Today, roughly 3,500 to 4,000 people call Coober Pedy home, though the population fluctuates somewhat with the fortunes of the opal mining industry and the rhythms of tourism that have become an increasingly significant part of the local economy in more recent decades. What makes this population truly remarkable is the extraordinary diversity of national and cultural backgrounds it represents. More than 45 different nationalities have been documented among Coober Pedy's residents at various points in its history, a statistic that seems genuinely improbable for a small desert mining town in the middle of Australia, but which makes complete sense once you understand how the promise of opal has acted as a magnet, drawing hopeful prospectors and miners from across the globe. Greek, Italian, Croatian, Serbian, Lebanese, Filipino, Afghan, Eastern European, and Aboriginal Australian communities all coexist within this small, remote, and deeply unusual place. Each group having arrived through its own particular historical pathway, but all having become part of the distinctive, hybrid, deeply individualistic culture that defines Coober Pedy today. The underground homes that have made this town internationally famous are locally known as dugouts, a simple, practical word that captures their origin without any unnecessary embellishment. Building a dugout involves excavating directly into the soft rock of the hillsides that surround the town, carving out rooms, corridors, and spaces that are then refined, finished, and furnished to create genuinely comfortable, fully functional homes. The rock in this part of South Australia is described geologically as weathered sandstone, soft enough to be cut relatively easily using the same kinds of machinery used in the mining process itself, but solid enough once cut to maintain stable, self-supporting walls and ceilings without constant reinforcement. This particular geological accident is what makes underground living here possible in a way that it would not be in most other parts of the world, where the ground is either too hard to excavate economically or too unstable to leave safely unshored. The process of creating a dugout home typically begins with excavating an entrance, usually cut directly into the face of a hillside at the chosen location. From this entrance, rooms are carved outward and deeper into the rock, with the excavated material carted away to join the mounded spoil heaps that dot the landscape around town. Walls are cut smooth, floors leveled, and ceilings shaped to whatever height suits the preferences and budget of the owner. Electrical wiring is run through channels cut into the rock walls, plumbing is installed, and the interiors are then plastered, painted, tiled, or otherwise finished in whatever style the inhabitants prefer. The results range enormously in scale and sophistication, from simple, modest single-room dwellings that would have been recognizable, to the earliest miners who sheltered underground out of necessity, to extraordinarily elaborate multi-room homes with modern kitchens, tiled bathrooms, comfortable living areas, and in some cases, features like home theaters and extensively decorated feature walls that would seem perfectly at home in an upscale city apartment. What strikes virtually every visitor to a dugout home for the first time is how normal, and in many cases how genuinely pleasant, the interior atmosphere feels. There are no windows, since there is no exterior wall through which a window could be cut in a hillside home, but this absence is less disorienting than you might expect, since carefully positioned internal lighting creates a warm, comfortable atmosphere that the eye quickly accepts. The temperature is extraordinary. Stepping inside from the scorching surface heat into the stable, cool, naturally maintained interior of a dugout feels something like stepping into a different world. A genuinely immediate and physical demonstration of why underground living makes such perfect sense in this particular environment. The silence underground is also notable. A deep, complete quiet, barely disturbed by any outside noise, making dugout homes remarkably peaceful sleeping environments, despite the modest size of the town surrounding them. Not everyone in Coober Pedy lives underground, it should be said. A significant portion of the population lives in conventional above-ground houses, typically built using insulated materials and fitted with the kind of powerful air conditioning systems necessary to make surface dwelling bearable during the worst of the summer heat. There are also a number of residents who have chosen what might be called hybrid living arrangements, homes where part of the structure extends above ground in conventional fashion, while other rooms are excavated into the hillside behind, allowing residents to enjoy both natural light and outdoor views in some rooms while retreating to the naturally cooled underground portions during the hottest periods of the day. The underground experience in Coober Pedy extends well beyond private homes, and this is one of the things that makes the town genuinely extraordinary, even by the unusual standards it has already established. There is an underground church, the Serbian Orthodox Church of St. Elijah, carved entirely into the rock and decorated with paintings and carvings that give it a remarkably intimate, cave chapel atmosphere, unlike any religious space you are likely to encounter anywhere else on the continent. There is a second underground church as well, the Catacomb Church, used by a different Christian congregation and similarly carved from the living rock in a way that makes the connection between its name and its physical reality feel entirely apt. Both churches hold regular services attended by their respective congregations, functioning as fully active places of worship that happen to exist entirely beneath the surface of the earth. There is an underground bookshop, an underground art gallery, and several underground hotels offering visitors the authentic experience of sleeping in a dugout room without requiring them to acquire their own hillside property. The most famous of these, Desert Cave Hotel, is perhaps the most elaborately developed underground accommodation in the world, offering guests properly appointed hotel rooms carved into the rock alongside an underground bar, underground exhibits, and all the other amenities you would expect from a modern hotel. All of it accessed through corridors cut into the earth and lit with the warm artificial lighting that serves the same purpose throughout Coober Pedy that natural light serves everywhere else. Staying underground for even a single night is enough to give most visitors a profound new appreciation for the clever, practical logic that led Coober Pedy's earliest residents to make this remarkable choice, and to understand why the community has maintained and expanded the underground lifestyle across more than a century of continuous habitation. The opal mining that created Coober Pedy and continues to sustain a significant portion of its economy is genuinely fascinating to understand in its own right, because it explains not just the history of the town, but the particular physical landscape surrounding it, the character of its inhabitants, and many of the specific daily rhythms and social patterns that define life here. Australia produces roughly 95% of the world's commercial opal, and a substantial portion of that extraordinary proportion comes from the fields around Coober Pedy specifically. The opals found here formed millions of years ago, when silica-rich groundwater seeped into cracks and voids in the sedimentary rock layers beneath what was then an ancient inland sea, gradually depositing the silica in a way that, over geological time, produced the characteristic play of color that makes opal one of the most visually striking gemstones in the world. Mining for opal in the Coober Pedy fields operates across a genuinely enormous area, with the active mining leases extending far out from the town itself across the surrounding plains and ridges. The landscape visible from any elevated point around town is dominated by the tailings, the conical mounds of excavated rock and earth, piled up beside each shaft during the mining process, creating a terrain that looks almost lunar in its strange, pockmarked, endlessly mounded character. These mounds cover thousands of hectares of land around the town and serve as one of the most immediately striking visual signatures of the landscape for anyone arriving by road or air for the first time. Modern opal mining here uses a range of methods depending on the individual miner's equipment, capital, and approach. Some operations use mechanized shaft boring and tunneling equipment capable of removing substantial quantities of rock quickly and systematically. Others rely on smaller-scale equipment or even, in some cases, hand tools for more selective, careful work in areas where the opal is believed to be particularly close to the surface or in relatively accessible deposits. A significant portion of opal prospecting and fossicking also happens at the tailings themselves, where amateur enthusiasts and visitors join experienced noodlers in sifting through the already excavated material on the off chance that a previous mining operation missed a piece of opal worth recovering. Finding even a small piece of quality opal in the tailings is a genuinely possible outcome for a patient and observant noodler, and this possibility adds a particular kind of excitement to the activity that draws visitors to spend hours in the hot sun working through the mounded spoil heaps with their hands or simple tools. The mining community itself has a character quite unlike that of any corporate or industrial mining operation you might encounter in other parts of the world. The majority of mining in Coober Pedy has historically been done by individual operators, small partnerships, or family groups working their own leases under a relatively straightforward licensing system that allows individuals to take out leases over defined areas and mine them largely on their own terms, selling whatever they find to dealers and buyers through a market that operates with a certain amount of informality alongside its more structured elements. This structure has historically attracted a particular kind of person to Coober Pedy, the independent-minded, risk-tolerant, self-reliant individual willing to invest enormous physical effort and accept considerable uncertainty in exchange for the possibility, always present but rarely guaranteed, of striking a find significant enough to change their life entirely. The possibility of that life-changing find is genuinely real, and the history of Coober Pedy is full of stories of miners who worked for years finding modest returns before a single extraordinary discovery transformed their circumstances overnight. Olympic Australis, the largest and most valuable rough opal ever found in the world, was unearthed near Coober Pedy in 1956, a stone weighing nearly 3.5 kilograms of extraordinary gem-quality material, representing a find of almost incalculable value. Stories like this one circulate through the mining community as a constant, living reminder of what remains theoretically possible with any swing of the pick or any rotation of the boring head, and it is this possibility as much as any rational assessment of average returns that keeps so many people committed to the difficult, expensive, and frequently frustrating business of chasing opal in the South Australian desert. The social culture that has developed around this mining economy is distinctly egalitarian, pragmatic, and suspicious of pretension in the way that physically demanding frontier communities often are. Status in Coober Pedy derives less from wealth or social background than from practical competence, community contribution, willingness to help neighbors, and a personal reliability that people in small, isolated communities learn quickly to value above almost everything else. Many residents have come to Coober Pedy from circumstances of genuine difficulty elsewhere, whether economic hardship in their country of origin, personal upheaval of various kinds, or simply a desire to start fresh in a place where nobody's past history is particularly scrutinized, and a person is largely judged on who they demonstrate themselves to be through their behavior and their work. This particular social dynamic gives the community a certain openness and tolerance that visitors often comment on, a genuine willingness to accept people on their own terms that reflects both the multicultural history of the place and the particular sensibility of those self-selected individuals willing to put themselves through the genuine hardships of outback mining life. Daily life in Coober Pedy operates on a schedule shaped partly by the same practical realities of heat and environment that drove the community underground in the first place. During the summer months, when daytime temperatures on the surface can reach 50 degrees Celsius and beyond, many residents adopt a modified daily rhythm that keeps outdoor activity concentrated in the early morning and late evening hours when the heat is at least marginally more survivable. Mining operations during summer are often shifted to focus on underground work during the peak heat of the day, with surface work concentrated in the cooler hours of the morning and evening. Children go to school in fully air-conditioned facilities designed to maintain comfortable learning temperatures regardless of what is happening outside. And the school day itself is timed and structured with the local climate very much in mind. The town's main commercial strip contains the various shops, restaurants, services, and facilities that form the practical infrastructure of everyday life for residents. There is a supermarket, though supplies are necessarily limited compared to what you would find in a larger, better-connected town, with fresh produce and perishable goods arriving on trucks from Adelaide along the long, demanding run up the Stewart Highway. There are service stations, a post office, a hospital providing basic medical services, with the more serious cases requiring patient transfer to larger facilities in Adelaide, several hotels and backpacker accommodations catering to the tourist trade, and a scattering of other businesses reflecting the needs and character of the community. A drive-in cinema, one of the last remaining drive-in theaters still operating in Australia, continues to function in Coober Pedy, providing outdoor evening entertainment in the form of films shown against the night sky, and it has become one of the town's most beloved and distinctive institutions, a perfect example of a community adapting a form of entertainment to its specific environment in a way that works beautifully on its own local terms. Water in Coober Pedy is a precious and carefully managed resource, reflecting the fundamental physical reality of the desert environment in which the town sits. There is essentially no surface water available locally, and the groundwater resources beneath the town and surrounding area are limited, and in some places of questionable quality, for direct consumption without treatment. The primary water supply for the town comes via a pipeline carrying water from the Umbiara Station bore field, located some 30 kilometers to the south, with additional water carted by truck from other sources as needed to supplement supply during periods of higher demand or supply interruption. This water supply system represents a significant piece of infrastructure whose ongoing maintenance is critical to the basic viability of the entire community, since the alternative in a landscape this dry and remote is essentially no alternative at all. Water costs in Coober Pedy are substantially higher than in most other Australian communities, reflecting both the cost of transportation and treatment and the fundamental scarcity that defines the resource in this environment. Residents are generally water conscious in ways that reflect both practical necessity and a longer accumulated community wisdom about the importance of not treating a precious and expensive resource carelessly. Gardens in Coober Pedy, where they exist, tend to be minimal and carefully chosen, featuring drought-tolerant native plants rather than the lush, water-hungry greenery found in gardens across wetter parts of the country, and this approach reflects a practical wisdom about working with the environment rather than against it that runs broadly through the local culture. Food supply in the town depends heavily on the regular truck deliveries coming up from Adelaide, supplemented in recent years by air freight for more perishable items needed on shorter timelines. The distance from major supply centers means that prices for many grocery items in Coober Pedy run noticeably higher than what residents of Adelaide or other larger Australian cities would pay for equivalent goods, a familiar dynamic in remote Australian communities where the cost of logistics is always built into the price of everything that arrives from outside. Local food production contributes very little to the overall food supply, given the obvious agricultural limitations of the surrounding desert environment, though some residents maintain small vegetable gardens taking advantage of available water and shade in creative ways that reflect the same practical ingenuity applied to so many other aspects of living in this unusual place. The impact of opal prices and mining fortunes on the daily economic life of the community is direct and significant. When global opal markets are strong and the mines are producing well, the town feels relatively prosperous. Businesses do well, new mining equipment gets purchased, and the general mood is optimistic. When opal prices fall, or when individual miners go through extended dry stretches without significant finds, the economic pressure on households and local businesses can be considerable, reflecting the fundamental uncertainty built into any extraction economy, where the resource being extracted is both finite and variably distributed across the rock, in ways that even the most experienced miners cannot predict with complete confidence. This boom-and-bust character has been part of the fabric of life in Coober Pedy since its earliest days, and long-term residents tend to have developed a fairly philosophical attitude toward the economic fluctuations that come with it, building savings during the good periods and drawing on community support and their own resourcefulness during the leaner times. Tourism has grown substantially as a component of the Coober Pedy economy over recent decades, drawn by the internationally distinctive character of the underground town, the extraordinary landscape, the opal mining heritage, and the town's growing recognition as one of the most genuinely unusual inhabited places on the Australian continent. Visitors arrive by road along the Stewart Highway, by a regular bus service connecting the town to Adelaide and other points along the highway route, and by the small regional airport receiving flights from Adelaide that make the 800-plus-kilometer journey in a fraction of the time required by road. Tour operators offer underground home tours, mine tours, opal buying experiences, outback landscape excursions, and various other activities designed to give visitors a genuine sense of what makes this place so different from anywhere else they have ever been. The surrounding landscape, beyond the mining fields immediately around town, contains some genuinely spectacular scenery that the tourism industry has increasingly worked to showcase. The Breakaways Reserve, located approximately 30 kilometers north of Coober Pedy, presents one of the most visually arresting landscapes in outback South Australia. A series of flat-topped mesas and eroded buttes rising from the surrounding plain, in colors ranging from deep red through orange and cream and pale white, creating a landscape that seems almost too dramatic and too perfectly composed to be real. This is a landscape that has been used as a filming location for numerous movies over the decades, including several well-known science fiction productions whose directors were looking for a terrain that would suggest an alien world without requiring the expense of building one from scratch. And in this sense, the landscape around Coober Pedy has appeared on cinema screens around the world in contexts that most viewers would never associate with a remote South Australian mining town. Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, filmed partly around Coober Pedy in the 1980s, is perhaps the most famous example, but the list of films and television productions that have used this landscape extends considerably further, reflecting how reliably the combination of the underground town, the lunar mine tailings, and the dramatic surrounding geology can deliver visual environments with an otherworldly quality that is extremely difficult to recreate artificially. The town has embraced this cinematic association with some enthusiasm, and remnants of various film sets can be found in the landscape around Coober Pedy, including a remarkable abandoned settlement set used during the production of a later entry in a well-known film franchise, left in place after filming and now visited by tourists as an attraction in its own right, an accidental monument to the strange collision of global entertainment industry and remote outback reality that has occurred repeatedly in this particular corner of Australia. Aboriginal culture and history in the Coober Pedy region represents a layer of the place's identity that sits both underneath and alongside the opal mining story, in ways that are increasingly being acknowledged and centered in how the town understands and presents itself. The Arabana people's traditional custodianship of this country extends back across an immense span of time, and their knowledge of the landscape, its resources, and its spiritual significance represents a profound and irreplaceable cultural heritage that continues to inform how the broader community relates to and understands the country they share. Efforts to incorporate Aboriginal voices, history, and cultural perspectives more fully into the story Coober Pedy tells about itself, whether through tourism programming, cultural education, or formal recognition of traditional custodianship, reflect a broader national conversation happening across Australia about how non-Aboriginal Australians can move toward more genuinely respectful and honest relationships with the First Nations peoples whose land forms the foundation of every Australian community. The multicultural character of Coober Pedy finds particularly vivid expression in the range of religious institutions the town supports. For a community of only a few thousand people, the number and variety of churches and other religious gatherings operating in Coober Pedy is genuinely striking, reflecting the diverse national and cultural backgrounds of residents who have brought their faith traditions with them from Greece, from Croatia, from Serbia, from Lebanon, and from numerous other countries across the globe. The Serbian Orthodox Church carved underground is the most architecturally dramatic of these, but it exists alongside several other Christian congregations, each maintaining their own community of worship, their own cultural and social traditions, and their own particular contributions to the broader tapestry of identity that makes Coober Pedy so unlike any other small Australian town. Community events and celebrations in Coober Pedy reflect this same multicultural richness, with various national and cultural groups maintaining their own traditions and festivals alongside broader community celebrations that bring the whole town together. The annual Coober Pedy Cup horse racing event, held in June during the Australian winter when surface temperatures are at least partially manageable, draws visitors from across the region and provides one of the most distinctive racing experiences in the country, with the distinctive opal field landscape providing a backdrop unlike anything found at metropolitan racecourses. Golf in Coober Pedy is played on what is officially recognized as the most extraordinary golf course in Australia, if not the world, a course without a single blade of grass, played across the bare, red dust surface of the outback with a small piece of synthetic turf that each golfer carries with them and uses as a portable tee. One of those genuinely delightful local innovations that perfectly captures the spirit of determined, creative adaptation to impossible conditions that defines this community. Education in Coober Pedy is provided primarily through the local area school, serving students from early childhood through secondary level within a single campus, that by necessity serves the entire student population given the town's size. The school reflects the multicultural community it serves, with students from a wide range of ethnic and cultural backgrounds learning together in an environment that arguably provides a more genuine experience of human diversity than many supposedly cosmopolitan institutions in much larger cities. For tertiary education, as in virtually all remote Australian communities, young residents must leave town and travel to Adelaide or other larger centres, creating the same familiar tension between educational opportunity and community connection that faces young people in isolated communities everywhere. Healthcare is provided through the Coober Pedy Hospital and Health Service, a facility capable of handling routine medical needs and relatively straightforward emergencies, staffed by medical professionals working under the particular conditions of remote area health service provision. For more serious cases, patient transfer to Adelaide is necessary, either by road ambulance on the long drive south or by air ambulance when time is more critical, and this reality, familiar throughout remote Australia, means that the distance from major medical centers represents a genuine background consideration in the daily life and health decisions of residents. The remote location also presents challenges for attracting and retaining medical staff, a challenge shared by virtually every remote Australian health service, and one that requires ongoing creative solutions in terms of staffing arrangements, professional development opportunities, and quality of life support for practitioners willing to work far from major centers. The political life of Coober Pedy, while small in scale, is often spirited and engaged, reflecting the generally individualistic and opinionated character of the community. Local government operates through the Coober Pedy District Council, responsible for the basic infrastructure and services that keep the town functioning, from roads and water supply to waste management and the maintenance of public facilities. The particular challenges of providing and maintaining infrastructure in such an extreme and remote environment make local government here an exercise in practical problem-solving under genuinely difficult conditions, with council members and local government staff dealing regularly with the consequences of intense heat, dust, distance from supply centers, and the wear that this environment inflicts on everything from bitumen road surfaces to mechanical equipment. The opal industry is regulated through a state licensing system administered by the Government of South Australia, under which prospecting and mining leases are issued for defined areas and periods, with conditions attached regarding environmental management, safety, and the reporting of significant fines. The relationship between the mining community and regulatory authorities has not always been entirely smooth, reflecting the traditional independence and self-reliance of the mining culture and the occasional perception among miners that regulations designed for larger, more corporate mining operations do not always translate sensibly to the small individual operator context that characterizes most activity in the Coober Pedy fields. Environmental obligations around mine rehabilitation, in particular, have been a periodic point of discussion, given that the scale and distribution of mining activity across the fields around the town has left a significant surface footprint that will require sustained effort and commitment to address over the longer term. The landscape itself, beyond its extraordinary visual character, presents a genuine practical safety challenge in the form of the numerous open mine shafts that dot the fields around the town, remnants of past prospecting and mining activity that have been left uncapped or inadequately fenced. These shafts represent a real hazard, particularly after dark when their presence is essentially invisible without lighting, and both the local council and state authorities have ongoing programs aimed at identifying and capping or fencing abandoned shafts to reduce the risk they pose to residents, visitors, and the livestock that graze across the surrounding pastoral land. The sheer number of shafts distributed across such a large area makes this a genuinely significant logistical challenge, and the work of making the landscape safer continues as an ongoing community priority. Power supply to Coober Pedy comes through a system that has undergone significant evolution in recent years, with the town's previous dependence on diesel generation supplemented increasingly by renewable energy, including both solar and wind generation, as part of a broader transition driven by both environmental considerations and the obvious economic logic of reducing dependence on fuel that must be transported over such a vast distance. The renewable energy transition in Coober Pedy has been watched with interest by other remote Australian communities facing similar supply challenges, since the lessons learned from introducing renewables into a remote, off-grid power system in such an extreme environment carry direct relevance for the many comparable situations across the Australian continent, where diesel generation has historically been the default solution, regardless of its cost and environmental implications. Communication infrastructure. Connecting Coober Pedy to the broader world has improved dramatically over recent decades, with satellite internet and mobile telephone coverage now providing residents with access to the same digital services and online connectivity available in much larger and better connected parts of Australia. This connectivity carries genuinely significant quality of life implications in a community so far from major centers, enabling remote work options, telemedicine consultations that reduce the need for some types of medical travel, online shopping that supplements the limited range of goods available locally, distance education opportunities, and the simple but important ability to maintain social connections with family and friends living elsewhere without the prohibitive expense of frequent travel or telephone calls that characterized the communication options available to earlier generations of Coober Pedy residents. The climate of Coober Pedy presents conditions that most Australians living along the temperate southern and eastern coast of the country would find genuinely shocking if they experienced them for the first time. Winter temperatures are actually quite mild and pleasant by outback standards, with days frequently reaching comfortable temperatures in the mid to high teens and low 20s Celsius, nights that cool off considerably but rarely reach genuinely dangerous cold levels, and the occasional brief rainfall that provides a temporary but welcome relief to the bare, dry landscape. This winter period is when outdoor activity in Coober Pedy is most pleasant, when the famous golf tournament and the horse racing event take place, and when the majority of tourist visits occur, since the summer months present surface conditions that most visitors find essentially unappealing and potentially unsafe for extended outdoor activity. Summer, running from roughly November through March, delivers the full force of the continental Australian heat in a form that is genuinely extreme, even by outback standards. Sustained periods of temperatures exceeding 45 degrees Celsius are regular occurrences, and the 50-degree mark, while not reached every summer, is not unusual enough to be treated as extraordinary. Under these conditions, the appeal of underground living becomes not merely understandable, but self-evidently logical to anyone experiencing the surface environment directly. Animals become inactive and seek shelter. Vehicle interiors reach temperatures capable of causing serious injury or death within minutes of parking in direct sun, and the outdoor environment becomes genuinely hostile to prolonged human presence without exceptional precautions. The dust storms that periodically descend on Coober Pedy during the warmer months add another dimension to the environmental challenges of life here. The fine red dust of the outback, lifted by wind from the surrounding bare plains and mine tailings, can reduce visibility to near zero during major dust events, and penetrates into buildings, vehicles, and equipment, with a thoroughness that residents learn to simply accept as a feature of the environment. Everything in Coober Pedy accumulates a fine coating of red dust as a matter of course, and the regular cleaning required to manage this infiltration is simply part of the maintenance routine of daily life in a way that residents from more temperate environments might find initially overwhelming, but that long-term Coober Pedy residents regard with the same matter-of-fact acceptance they bring to the heat, the distance, and the other distinctive challenges of their chosen home. The opal trading economy that underlies so much of Coober Pedy's commercial life operates partly through established retail channels, with licensed opal shops selling finished stones and jewelry to tourists and trade buyers, and partly through more informal networks connecting individual miners directly to traders and buyers from around the world. International opal buyers, particularly from Asia, Europe, and North America, visit Coober Pedy with some regularity during the peak mining and trading seasons, spending time in the town evaluating stones, negotiating prices, and building the long-term relationships with individual miners and dealers that sustain the global opal trade. This direct connection to international gemstone markets represents one of the more remarkable aspects of Coober Pedy's economy. The fact that a small town in the middle of the South Australian desert has direct commercial relationships with buyers and retailers across Asia and Europe and the Americas, all connected through the extraordinary gemstone that happens to be concentrated in the rock beneath this particular stretch of outback. The social dynamics among the multicultural population of Coober Pedy are complex and not without their tensions, as would be true of any community bringing together such diverse backgrounds, histories, and cultural frameworks within such a confined geographic and social space. The Greek and Croatian communities, for example, both arrived in significant numbers during the post-World War II period, each bringing their own cultural traditions, their own languages, and their own religious practices to a town that was already developing its own distinctive hybrid character. The Italian community, similarly, established its presence through several waves of immigration, extending from the mid-20th century through later decades, contributing to both the mining workforce and the broader social and cultural life of the town in ways that remain visible today, in family names, religious affiliations, and the general fabric of community relationships. For many migrants who came to Coober Pedy, often with very little capital but considerable physical capability, determination, and willingness to take on the risks of independent mining, the opal fields represented a genuine opportunity of a kind that the more established and structured Australian economy might not otherwise have offered them. The possibility of striking a significant find without requiring formal credentials, corporate connections, or substantial startup capital has historically made opal mining in Coober Pedy an unusually accessible pathway toward economic self-sufficiency for people arriving with few resources but strong backs and determined spirits. Some of the most successful miners and opal dealers in the town's history began with essentially nothing, arriving as relatively recent migrants without established Australian social networks or capital, and built genuinely substantial livelihoods through a combination of skill, persistence, and the occasional piece of good fortune that the opal fields have sometimes chosen to deliver. The Underground Art Gallery in Coober Pedy deserves particular mention as an institution that captures something important about the broader cultural life of this unusual community. Local artists, some of whom are Aboriginal, some with European heritage, and others with backgrounds from across the extraordinary multicultural spectrum of the town, exhibit works that draw on the landscape, the history, and the daily experience of outback mining life, creating an artistic conversation that is genuinely specific to this place and this community in ways that could not easily be replicated anywhere else. Aboriginal art from the region, working within long-established visual traditions, while also engaging with contemporary experience and perspective, sits alongside works from artists whose backgrounds in European or Asian traditions have been transformed by the particular light, color, and character of the outback environment they now inhabit. Children growing up in Coober Pedy experience a childhood that is genuinely unlike what most other Australian children would recognize. They grow up in a landscape of extraordinary, alien beauty, accustomed from their earliest years to temperatures and conditions that would seem extreme to most Australians. Familiar with the rhythms and culture of the mining community, in an immediate, practical way that children growing up in cities never encounter, and surrounded by a community that represents more languages, national backgrounds, and cultural traditions than most metropolitan schools achieve, even with much larger student bodies. Former residents speaking about their Coober Pedy childhoods often describe a combination of the obvious practical limitations of growing up in such a remote and resource-constrained place, with a deep affection for the particular community, landscape, and set of experiences that shaped them, the kind of complex relationship with a difficult but deeply loved place that is recognizable from isolated communities around the world. The question of the town's long-term future is one that thoughtful residents discuss with a mixture of realism and determination. The opal resource, while still substantial, is finite, and the gradual depletion of the more accessible deposits over successive decades of intensive mining means that the effort and cost required to reach productive ground has generally increased over time. The town's population has fluctuated, generally declining from peak levels reached during particularly productive periods, and partially recovering during subsequent upswings, and the long-term trend of gradual population decline, seen across many remote Australian outback communities, represents a genuine background challenge for Coober Pedy's civic and community leadership. Tourism offers a partial answer to the diversification challenge, and the town's genuinely extraordinary character gives it real advantages as a tourism destination that more ordinary remote communities lack. The combination of the underground lifestyle, the opal mining heritage, the multicultural community, the dramatic landscape, and the town's cinematic associations creates a product that is genuinely unique and that continues to attract visitors from across Australia and internationally. The challenge lies in developing and sustaining tourism infrastructure of sufficient quality and variety to keep visitors engaged long enough to make a significant economic contribution, without compromising the authentic, rough-edged character that makes Coober Pedy genuinely different from packaged tourism experiences elsewhere. Renewable energy projects around Coober Pedy have opened up some interesting possibilities for economic diversification beyond the immediate tourism and mining sectors, with the extraordinary solar resource available in this part of Australia attracting interest from energy companies and researchers exploring what might be possible if the vast, largely empty land surrounding the town could be harnessed more systematically for energy production and storage. Whether these possibilities will develop into genuinely significant new economic activity for the local community remains to be seen, but the conversation itself reflects a broader searching for ways to sustain the community beyond its existing economic foundations that runs through much of the discussion about Coober Pedy's future. The water security challenge, which has always been present as a background concern, has become a more urgent focus of attention as climate projections suggest that the already extremely dry conditions across the South Australian outback may become drier and more variable over coming decades. Investments in water infrastructure, in water recycling and reuse, and in more efficient water use practices across both household and mining applications reflect